I'm really glad to talk about this topic because it has been dear to my heart for a really long time. Um, so let me start with my personal journey. I grew up in Switzerland, a very small country in the heart of Europe, and witnessed an enormous building boom during a period of economic growth after the Second World War. I saw how agricultural fields were disappearing for more houses, stores, and industry. Here you see Reinach, the village we moved to in 1963. The photo is from 1949, so when we moved there, there were already many more houses than you can see here, but there were still orchards and agricultural fields. Here you can see two pictures of the city today. Almost all agricultural lands are gone. So already as a youth, I was thinking about what might happen to the Earth if this human industrial expansion happens on a global scale. Today, humanity uses the equivalent of about 1.7 planets to provide the resources we use and to absorb our waste. This means that we are using natural resources faster than they can replenish. When I was young, my family spent a few weeks in the Swiss Alps every year. The glaciers were a consolation to me. I thought that at least the glaciers are safe from human destruction, so high up, beautiful and majestic. Unfortunately, I was wrong. In 1969, we were fortunate to ski down the Aletsch Glacier. You needed a mountain guide for that adventure, whom you can see second from the left. My sister and I are on the right. It was an incredible experience. The beauty and grandeur of the glacier in the sunshine is hard to describe. It was also the only place in Switzerland where I did not see any sign of human activity, no buildings or any other structures. Here you can see the Aletsch Glacier today, a bit further down. You see a lot of gray, bare rock instead of white ice and snow. The Aletsch is the largest glacier in the Alps. It took us about 6 hours to ski down. But the glacier has been shrinking at increasing rates. It now recedes at least 50 meters every year, sometimes more than 100 meters. It has also been losing volume. Here you can see the loss of volume just between 2010 and 2018. Glaciers all over the world have been melting at an accelerated rate, including at the poles. The ice is melting because of global warming. Last year, the Earth reached temperatures of 1.6 degrees Celsius warmer than at pre-industrial times. According to climate scientist James Hansen, the average global human-caused warming is now slightly below the famous threshold of 1.5 degrees, and it is questionable whether it will be possible to keep temperatures from rising above 2 degrees Celsius. And today, news broke that January 2025 was the hottest since record-taking, the hottest January, that is, with a 1.7 degrees Celsius global average. The Earth has been warming because of an increase of carbon in the atmosphere, which traps the sun's energy. On this slide, you can see carbon dioxide concentrations of the past 800,000 years until today. On the right, we can see the unprecedented rapid increase in carbon concentrations since the Industrial Revolution. Today's levels are extraordinary. Last time the atmospheric CO2 was that high was several million years ago, long before there were any humans. Human activities are responsible for this increase, especially by the burning of fossil fuels and deforestation. This warming of the Earth changes the climate. People all over the world are already suffering from the impacts of climate change. More severe heat waves, droughts, wildfires, storms, flooding, and sea level rise. Scientific projections for the future of the Earth's climate are dire. Then in 1981, we moved to the United States. I was very impressed about the large flocks of birds in Rhode Island, and I saw many hundreds of monarch butterflies on a field of goldenrod. Today, we see fewer flocks of birds, and when we do, they are much smaller. And monarch butterflies have become rare sightings. Perhaps I see 3 or 4 in one year. Humanity has destroyed about half of all plants and 82% of wild mammals. About 60% of all mammals on Earth are livestock, mostly cattle and pigs. 36% are humans, and only 4% are wild animals. Insects have been vanishing worldwide. Insects are essential for pollination and as a food source for birds, amphibians, and mammals. The diminishment and extinction of plants and animal species are happening at an extremely fast rate. Each extinct species is a loss for humanity. We will not be able to use these species for the development of new crops or for the research of new medicines and treatments. Even more importantly, species extinctions create holes in the web of life, which disrupt the ecological balance and have far-reaching negative impacts on directly and indirectly connected species. Human life depends on healthy ecosystems for clean water, air, and food. Moreover, each plant and animal has intrinsic value that cannot be measured by a one-sided utilitarian approach. We are facing a triple planetary crisis. In addition to climate change and the loss of biodiversity, the scope of pollution of all kinds is mind-boggling. A survey of the chemical inventories of 19 countries and regions revealed that about 350,000 chemical substances have been registered for production and large-scale use over the past 30 to 40 years. Around the world, 1 million plastic bottles are purchased every minute, while up to 5 trillion plastic bags are used worldwide every year. Today, we produce about 400 million tons of plastic waste every year. 100,000 marine mammals and turtles and 1 million seabirds are killed by marine plastic pollution every year. And 1 in 3 fish caught for human consumption now contains plastic. And then there is nutrient pollution, primarily caused by agriculture through over-fertilization. Much nitrogen and phosphorus from fertilizers go into our rivers and oceans, causing excessive growth of algae. This causes eutrophication or dead zones, which kills fish and other aquatic animals. Air pollution is the largest cause of disease and premature death in the world. More than 7 million people die prematurely each year due to pollution. So What can we do about all these threats to nature and human life? The good news is that we have sufficient scientific knowledge and the technology to live more environmentally sustainable and to restore some of what we have destroyed. The even better news is that most actions that address one environmental problem can contribute to improving the others as well. For example, restoring a forest with native trees helps wild plants and animals, as well as the climate. Reducing chemical fertilizers and toxic herbicides and pesticides in agriculture has a positive impact on human health, on biodiversity, on clean water, and on the climate. Electrifying the transportation system and strengthening public transportation is essential for reducing global warming and its harmful impacts on the climate, as well as reducing air pollution, which makes people sick. The bad news is that fundamental change is required in all economic areas. The energy system, the transportation system, the food system, the building sector, etc. The actions required are gigantic in scope and must happen from the international level down to the national, local, and individual level. And all sectors of society must be on board: government, business, and civil society. Such an enormous task is unprecedented, and I would say its scope is beyond comprehension. We could compare our situation with a train racing toward a precipice. We are all sitting in the train, debating its speed and direction, but it is still moving toward the precipice with high speed. There are now increasing numbers of people who believe that all hope is lost. This is understandable when looking at scientific projections for the future, at the worsening climate change impacts and the scope of environmental destruction, and at the inertia of humans to take action. Moreover, we can expect that increasingly severe climate change impacts will converge with other worsening social and environmental problems, which will result in a major crisis, possibly even in a collapse of human civilization. So let's take a step back and look at human history. Major transformations in human mindsets and cultures happened through the world's great religions. The Baha'i faith teaches that throughout human history, the creator of the universe has provided teachings that guide humans in their relationship with each other and with nature by sending prophets such as Abraham, Krishna, Buddha, Moses, Christ, and Mohammed. They all motivated individuals to grow spiritually and to live ethically, and they inspired new flourishing civilizations. Would we not expect further divine guidance for our age at a time when the very survival of humankind is at stake? Baha'is believe that God did indeed send us a new prophet, Baha'u'llah. Baha'u'llah was born in 1817 at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. He lived in Iran until the government banished him from his native country. His long exile brought him to Baghdad, Istanbul, and as a final destination to the prison city of Akko in the Holy Land. At that time, all these places were still untouched by the industrialization going on in Europe. I became a Baha'i at age 17 because the Baha'i teachings provided me with the answer about the meaning of life. However, when studying environmental issues throughout my life, I became increasingly desperate and searched the Baha'i teachings for solutions. And to my great relief, I found what I think are the needed ethical framework, the practical guidance, and the spiritual motivation to address the environmental crisis. So, in the remaining time this evening, we will briefly discuss how some of these teachings can help humanity to address the environmental crisis. Of course, we will not have the time to discuss all the Baha'i teachings and how they relate to the environment, but you are welcome to bring up some others during our conversation. Let us first look at human relationship with nature. Stewardship of the earth is one of the teachings which you can find in all religions. Jewish scriptures say, when God created the first human beings, God led them around all the trees of the Garden of Eden and said, "See my works, how beautiful and praiseworthy they are. Think of this and do not corrupt or destroy my world." The Islamic Declaration of Climate Change summarizes the teachings of Mohammed and applies them to our age. God created the earth in perfect equilibrium. The present climate change catastrophe is a result of the human disruption of this balance. Baha'u'llah explained, nature is God's will and is its expression in and through the contingent world. If nature is God's creation, we should not destroy it. All human beings, plants and animals are God's creation and will. A close related aspect is human interconnectedness with nature. In the past decades, we have acted based on the illusion that we humans are separate and independent from nature. Now we need to realize that we are part of the web of life and cannot control nature or each other through violence. We are all connected to each other and to all living beings. Most of our actions have a direct or indirect impact on other people, on plants, animals, and the climate. We have seriously degraded this web of life and and disrupted the balance in the Earth's natural system. The Baha'i teachings explain, reflect upon the inner realities of the universe. Every part of the universe is connected with every other part by ties that are very powerful and admit of no imbalance. Human actions are destroying this balance in nature with serious consequences, not only for plants and animals, but for human life. A deep insight into the interconnectedness of all life is fundamentally important when tackling environmental problems. This brings us to a new concept in religious history. The Baha'i faith teaches that we need to rely on both science and religion, and that these two must be in harmony. Science and religion are tools to investigate the reality from two different angles. Science asks, how does the universe work? Religion asks, why is there a universe? And what is its purpose? And what is our purpose of existence as human beings? How can we apply this to the environmental crisis, taking climate change as an example? Science can explain the causes of global warming and can project with various amounts of certainty the impacts of the resulting changes in the climate. Science and technology can also provide some technical solutions. Then, however, it is up to the public and to politicians to consider scientific facts, to apply values, and then to act accordingly. The values come from religion. Closely connected to this topic is truthfulness, which, according to the Baha'i teachings, is the foundation of all human virtues. So, why is truthfulness so significant when we talk about climate change? You're likely aware that some people have deliberately shed doubt on climate science, either driven by vested interests or by ideology. As intended, this has confused the public and has seriously delayed effective climate action. Truthfulness, reliance on science, and assessing the reality of our situation are the first steps to human progress. The next step is the application of values. Climate change is often perceived as just an environmental problem. However, it is very much a human problem, a social issue. The poor of the world are generally first and most severely affected by climate change, such as farmers in Africa or people in Bangladesh who are threatened by sea level rise. Or think of the people living on small islands that will have to leave their homes and lose their cultures because of sea level rise. In general, one can say that those most vulnerable to climate change are often least able to afford adaptation measures such as dikes, irrigation to compensate for droughts, or moving away from flood or storm-prone areas. Even in the developed countries are the poor first at risk from the impacts of climate change. Poor people are the most affected by rising food prices or by dislocation because of severe storms. Poverty alleviation is a central teaching in all religions. The Bible teaches, "Verily I say unto you, inasmuch as ye have done it unto one of the least of these my brethren, ye have done it unto me." And Baha'u'llah wrote, "O ye rich ones on earth, the poor in your midst are my trust. Guard ye my trust, and be not intent only on your own ease." In the Baha'i faith, there is an added dimension to that. Baha'u'llah calls not only for the eradication of poverty, but also of extreme wealth. Eliminating the extremes of wealth is important for climate change mitigation, because the rich people of the world are the ones who are responsible for most of the carbon pollution in our atmosphere. This graph shows the annual emissions of top emitters. You can see how China's emissions have grown tremendously in recent decades. However, this issue is quite complex. When we look at emissions per capita, the picture is quite different. You can see how much more CO2 the average American is emitting compared to other people. You can also see that emissions in the US and the European Union have been declining. However, this issue is even more complex. The mining of resources and the production of goods have increasingly been taking place in developing nations. On this slide, you can see the major flows from the areas of production to the countries of consumption. So while China's emissions have been growing rapidly, the consumption of the West is partly to blame for that increase. We also need to be aware that there is a small number of extremely rich people all over the world who are consuming much of the world's resources and cause more than their fair share of emissions. Here you can see the disparity of poverty and wealth illustrated. More than 2/3 of the world's people own together only 3% of the wealth. The top 8.5% of the world owns 83%. Wealth is a major cause of global warming, because of the huge consumption of the rich. The Baha'i teachings contain provisions that would limit the accumulation of extreme wealth, but encourage individuals to acquire wealth to spend it for their own needs and for the common good. For example, they suggest very progressive taxes. Since poor people suffer first and the most from climate change impacts, and since the activities of the rich people are responsible for the warming of the earth, climate change is foremost an issue of justice. Another aspect of justice is the responsibility for reducing emissions. On this slide, you can see the historical CO2 emissions from different countries. These emissions raise the CO2 concentration in the atmosphere for a long time. Historically, the European Union and the United States certainly bear most responsibility. Therefore, this is also an issue of justice between developed and developing nations. By far the greatest justice issue is the fate of our children, grandchildren, and generations to come. What kind of a planet are we leaving to them? This is called intergenerational justice, justice between generations. Young people all over the world are beginning to understand how much their future is in danger because of climate change, and they are speaking out. It is imperative to uphold justice in all political and economic decisions. Baha'u'llah said, "No light can compare with the light of justice." The establishment of order in the world and the tranquility of the nations depend upon it. And the Baha'i writings further say, we ask God to endow human souls with justice, so that they may be fair and may strive to provide for the comfort of all, that each member of humanity may pass his life in the utmost comfort and welfare. It is very relevant to our topic that Baha'u'llah directly connects justice to moderation. Whoso cleaveth to justice can, under no circumstances, transgress the limits of moderation. The civilization, so often vaunted by the learned exponents of arts and sciences, will, if allowed to overleap the bounds of moderation, bring great evil upon men. If carried to excess, civilization will prove as prolific a source of evil as it had been of goodness when kept within the restraints of moderation. It is impossible to have perpetual economic growth in a finite biosphere. We need to learn to accept the limits of our planet. In the past, it was justified to consider a growing economy as desirable progress. And this still holds true for many poor people and countries of the world. However, for the rich countries and for the planet as a whole, we have reached the limits of growth. In fact, we have already far surpassed them. The current capitalistic economy exploits the earth and destroys its life support systems. It also exploits many people and exacerbates the extremes of wealth and poverty. The baseline for a sustainable economy should be the carrying capacity of the earth. In other words, we cannot continue to produce more and more stuff. However, many people are not connected to a higher purpose in life and therefore fill their inner emptiness with material things. This materialism results in excessive consumption. Millions of people try to find meaning in their lives by shopping and owning. One scholar even called consumerism the first global religion. However, several scientific studies indicate that once basic needs are met, human beings don't increase their life satisfaction or happiness by accumulating greater wealth. On a finite planet, it is no longer possible to satisfy everybody's wants. The goal should be to provide for the needs of all people and to improve the quality of life for everyone. Gandhi said, "The earth provides enough to satisfy every man's needs, but not every man's greed." That's why the teachings about moderation and the spiritual meaning of life can help us overcome our destructive addiction to stuff. The Universal House of Justice, the supreme institution of the Baha'i faith, wrote, "At all times, contentment and moderation, benevolence and fellow feeling, sacrifice and reliance on the Almighty are qualities that befit the God-fearing soul. The forces of materialism promote a quite contrary line of thinking, that happiness comes from constant acquisition, that the more one has, the better, that worry for the environment is for another day." Spirituality is the remedy for materialism and consumerism. A spiritual outlook can help us shift the emphasis from consumption to well-being and a meaningful life. The Baha'i writings say, "Man is in reality a spiritual being, and only when he lives in the spirit is he truly happy." Baha'u'llah calls us to live a life of contentment. Take from this world only to the measure of your needs, and forgo that which exceedeth them. And in the next sentence, he connects contentment again with justice. Observe equity in all your judgment, and transgress not the bounds of justice, nor be of them that stray from its path. Justice, moderation, and contentment are not abstract concepts. They need to be applied in daily action. The Universal House of Justice wrote, "Every choice a Baha'i makes, as employer or as employee or employer, producer or consumer, borrower or lender, benefactor or beneficiary, leaves a trace, and the moral duty to lead a coherent life demands that one's economic decisions be in accordance with lofty ideals, that the purity of one's aims be matched by the purity of one's actions to fulfill those aims." Another important Baha'i teaching is trustworthiness. You may wonder about the relationship of trustworthiness and the environmental crisis. Actually, there is a lot. We can blame corruption for much environmental destruction. Illegal logging, for example, is a major cause of deforestation. Another example are companies that ignore environmental regulations just to increase their profit. In addition, illegal logging, poaching, and illegal unsustainable fishing also rob communities of natural resources and therefore undermine their sustainable socio-economic development. Trustworthiness is the antidote for corruption and is strongly emphasized by Baha'u'llah. Trustworthiness is the greatest portal leading onto the tranquility and security of the people. In truth, the stability of every affair has depended and does depend upon it. All the domains of power, of grandeur, and of wealth are illumined by its light. Trustworthiness is, in truth, the best of vestures for your temples and the most glorious crown for your heads. The central Baha'i teaching is the oneness of humankind, that all human beings are equal, that there is only one race, the human race, and that this is the age in which we must learn to live together like one global family. Several other teachings are connected to that overall theme. Most important is the abandonment of all prejudices. Recognition of this truth requires abandonment of prejudice, prejudice of every kind: race, class, color, creed, nation, sex, degree of material civilization, everything which enables people to consider themselves superior to others. You have probably heard of environmental racism. People of color are more likely to live in a neighborhood close to a coal-fired power plant, an industrial complex that releases toxic chemicals, a landfill, or even a hazardous waste facility. The air they breathe and the water they drink are more likely polluted than in a predominantly white suburb. Then, of course, people of color are also more often vulnerable to the impacts of climate change, such as heat waves, storms, and rising food prices. And on top of all that, the voice of people of color is often not represented in decision making because of discriminatory practices, including voting. The equality of men and women is another new teaching in religious history, and it is significant regarding climate change in many ways. First, we need to consider that women are disproportionately more affected by the impacts of climate change. They generally have less access to resources that could help them cope with a changing climate. And as caregivers, their lives are also severely impacted by increasing water scarcity and diseases like malaria that are spreading to new areas because of climate change. The empowerment of women is not only a human rights issue, but also a key element to fight poverty and environmental destruction. Experience has shown already that the participation of women in climate change mitigation and adaptation efforts is vital. Women have always been leaders in working for the health and well-being of their families and communities. The status of women also has a direct impact on population growth. Greenhouse gas emissions have only reached such a dangerous high level because of the large numbers of people living on our planet. Today, there are more than 8 billion people. Population growth is much smaller in countries where women have more rights. Family size is generally smaller when women are empowered to plan their family in terms of birth timing and spacing, and when they have the freedom to participate fully and equally in society. The principle of the oneness of humankind does not only uphold the equality of all human beings, it is also the ultimate goal to be realized. Baha'u'llah said, "Take pride not in love for yourselves, but in love for your fellow creatures. Glory not in love for your country, but in love for all mankind." The deep belief in the oneness of humankind is essential to effectively address the environmental crisis in two ways. The principle of the oneness of humankind helps us as individuals to understand that my everyday actions affect my brothers and sisters all around the world. This attitude will change the way we live and what we consume. Applying the principle of the oneness of mankind on the societal level is a prerequisite to address nationalism and is the foundation for global governance. And all of this is very important for effective climate action. The Universal House of Justice wrote, "The welfare of any segment of humanity is inextricably bound up with the welfare of the whole." Humanity's collective life suffers when any one group thinks of its own well-being in isolation from that of its neighbors, or pursues economic gain without regard for how the natural environment, which provides sustenance for all, is affected. Baha'u'llah said, "The well-being of mankind, its peace and security are unattainable unless and until its unity is firmly established." The Earth Charter clearly spells out the need for the unification of humankind. The choice is ours: form a global partnership to care for Earth and one another, or risk the destruction of ourselves and the diversity of life. As we can see from the outcome of a series of international climate conferences, our global human family is paralyzed by nationalistic and short-term self-interests. It is unlikely that the required major transformation of society can be achieved within the existing systems of political and economic thinking. We need to make a transition from thinking in terms of nation states to world citizenship. Baha'u'llah said, "The earth is but one country, and mankind its citizens." Embracing the concept of the oneness of humanity will change our perspective of climate mitigation efforts in many ways. Here just one example. Some people and governments in developed countries have argued that the costs for mitigating global warming are too high for their economy. They ignore the fact that the first severely harmful effects of climate change are happening primarily in other countries. Such reasoning will stop when we regard the world as just one country and humankind as one family. We equally value the lives of people in other countries who may often be poor or of a different race. Moreover, the environmental crisis demands that all of humanity work together to implement solutions. The solution to climate change exceeds the capacities and resources of any one nation and requires the full cooperation of all nations, each according to their means. Pollution has no boundaries. Strong and enforceable laws need to be created to limit greenhouse gas emissions, not only on the local and national level, but also on the international level. There is a desperate need for global environmental governance. Baha'u'llah called for the establishment of a World Federation of Nations with its own legislative, judicial, and executive bodies. Such a world order is not only new in that it encompasses all of humankind, but also new in the underlying philosophy. The first priority is the well-being of everyone on the planet. National, regional, and local interests are respected, but are considered in the light of humankind being one family. This view is the opposite of nationalism, which has been the stumbling block to all international climate negotiations. This new world order is balanced. It also promotes decentralization and the empowerment of people at the grassroots. All people need to have a voice in the decisions that will affect their lives. Minorities and women must be especially empowered to take part in all plans for sustainable development. The knowledge and experience of indigenous peoples is essential in that process. Indigenous people all over the world have been at the forefront of calling for climate action and for protecting forests and water. Development projects have proven to be much more beneficial if the knowledge and experience of the local population are incorporated. The reason why current politics are not helping humanity advance is that politicians are usually driven by vested interests and ideologies. They are only concerned about their parties or their nation's interests. In addition, they have a very short time horizon, usually just to the next election. But our actions today will affect the climate for many hundreds, even thousands of years. Baha'i consultation is a spiritual method for decision making. Individuals participating in consultation have the common good in mind and are open to give up their personal points of view when others present facts or different perspectives that may be better. This requires the conquering of the ego and therefore spiritual development. But this is the only way to arrive at decisions that are really in the best interest of everyone. Moreover, this principle of consultation also includes that a majority decision is supported even by the minority who may have voted against it. And this assures unified and effective action. Already in 1981, the Universal House of Justice stated, "Until such time as the nations of the world understand and follow the admonitions of Baha'u'llah to wholeheartedly work together in looking after the best interests of all humankind, and unite in the search for ways and means to meet the many environmental problems besetting our planet, little progress will be made towards their solution." Climate change requires enormous changes in almost all human activities, as well as some sacrifice by the rich people of the world. Such profound change requires a fundamental change in consciousness. Humanity's crying need calls for a fundamental change of consciousness, that the time has come when each human being on earth must learn to accept responsibility for the welfare of the entire human family. And right here we have the new destination for our train, a new direction for humankind. It's the welfare of the entire human family. Imagine a society where the well-being of all of humankind is the first priority in all decisions made by individuals, institutions, politicians, governments, and businesses. Perhaps we can summarize the Baha'i teachings with this quotation from Baha'u'llah: "Let your vision be world-embracing rather than confined to your own self." Focusing on the common good, on the well-being of everyone, is important for us as individuals to lead a meaningful life. And it is essential for humanity to address climate change and other critical environmental and social problems of our time. These were a few examples just a few examples of how we can apply the Baha'i teachings to address the environmental crisis. Of course, Baha'is, together with our friends, are still very much in the process of learning how to express these teachings in our personal and community lives, and how to apply them to the ills of the world. We are still at the very beginning of spiritual transformation. Yet these teachings can provide an ethical framework and the motivation to work for harmony among ourselves and with nature. And most importantly, they provide a vision of a spiritual, just, and sustainable society worth working for. I thank you all for listening, and I look forward to hearing your views and comments.